let's go ahead and roll into our final talk of the day. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Felesia Stukes from Johnson C. Smith University. She is an assistant professor of computer science there, which is a small private historically Black university. She has funding from the National Science Foundation, which led to her to a curriculum development initiative at her institution, enhancing two existing analytics courses and establishing 4 new courses for a minor in data science. So cool stuff going on there. In 2019, she founded the Social Computing Lab, whose research is situated at the intersection of communities and technology, using computer models and data science to explain social phenomena. So fascinating stuff there too. Her work has several application areas, including sports, business, education. Her research is focused on computer science education to find more effective approaches to bring computer science to a wider and more diverse audience. I think we'll probably hear some similar things like that in the talk today. She's got additional funding from the U.S. Department of Defense, which led to expanding her Data Bulls, Data Analytics, Technology, and Athletics Bulls project, which enhanced her institutional capacity through human performance, player tracking, and sports team analytics equipment. So she's got her fingers in a lot of different things, which is really, really exciting. So I'm going to let you take it away, but really excited to have you here, and we'll go from there. If you have questions as we go along, people, please just go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'll moderate at the end.
All right, thank you so much, Russ, and I'll go ahead and get started. Yes, I am Assistant Professor of Computer Science at Johnson C. Smith University, and that is located in Charlotte, North Carolina. Fun fact that JCSU for short sits on the highest point in Charlotte, and this is the picture of our campus, what would be like a historic building, and the tower is the point that you see in our logos, and the point that, again, you can see from the Charlotte skyline. And so my interests are in social computing, and which kind of led me into the computer science education piece, which also led me into data science, and then ultimately sports analytics. So I will talk a little bit about all of that today with you. Just a couple of quick facts. So sports-wise, Johnson C. Smith is a Division II institution. We have approximately 15 teams. Our sports teams are called the Golden Bulls, and our colors are gold and blue, as you may be able to see. It is a small private institution, so we have roughly 1,500 students total among undergraduate and graduate, but it is predominantly an undergraduate program, so it's fairly small. And, I wanted to start talking about this idea for those who may not be aware. It's broadening participation in computing. And so known as BPC for short, it's a very intentional process of increasing the participation of these groups that are traditionally underrepresented in computing or any discipline that's closely related. So we do see a lot of overlaps with other STEM disciplines in this area. And then there's another component of BPC, which is inclusion. And it's, again, very actively, very intentionally engaging with diversity through activities within an academic department. And so, just to kind of go over some of the data around why BPC is still necessary, specifically with Black and Hispanic workers, they're still underrepresented in the STEM workforce. So if you see, this is a very, recent data, which is over time, if we're looking at across STEM, again, across all of STEM jobs, you might have approximately 11% of Black representation and 17% Hispanic. But specifically within the disciplines, if you can see that with, in math, it's around 9, and in computing around 7. So it's still, fairly low for Black workers. Hispanic workers, it seems consistent across the board around 8. So it's still not representative of the population. And if you look in and specifically at women, you know, we do have a lot of activities and initiatives to support the representation and, you know, increase the retention of women in the physical sciences, computing, engineering, and yet still over time, we're still seeing lower numbers. And so this is just kind of a graphic that kind of talks about that, you know, that shows that women, you know, in some instances, it is slowly increasing, but not enough. In other instances, the representation of women is decreasing, and computing is one of those disciplines where that is occurring. And so that leads to these broad initiatives and broadening participation, because, as we know, computing is becoming more and more pervasive in our society, and it does drive a lot of economic innovation, and therefore there's a extremely growing high demand for more specialists at all levels of the workforce. And so we cannot, as a nation, overlook any other populations, because everyone is needed to help meet these demands. And so with BPC, it is a way to address these longstanding underrepresentations, of course. And the way this is approached is by being innovative, creative, you know, creating frameworks, using methods and strategies that can help improve the recruitment and retention of these groups. And so what I want everyone to do, actually, if you can, if you're able, I want you to go to this site. It's bpcnet.org/statistics. Take a moment to go to this site. And what it is, this is a screenshot, but what it will do, there's a tool that allows you to display disaggregated data for computing or engineering degree recipients at your institution. And so when you go to the page, again, bpcnet.org/statistics, you'll see the screen, the image on the right, which you first select your state. And then once you selected a state, you can select your specific institution. And if you have different degrees, you can select a specific degree type. And so what it will do is it provides a set of data that you can, in a table format or a plot format. So again, it's bpcnet.org/statistics. So it's a really great tool, and I highly recommend that you kind of take a look. So again, you can look at computing degrees, and you can also look at separately engineering degrees. So this is an example of what the result would be for my institution, which is Johnson C. Smith University. So we can see over in this particular plot describes the years 2018 through 2021. And, you know, in this particular, it's not as clear to note, but when you look at it for your own institutions, it's interactive. But for example, like the purple is probably the clearest color here, and that represents like the Black women who have received computing degrees at my institution. And so the representation there is okay, but it's still not as good as it should be. So we're still experiencing, you know, a lower representation of women, even though we are predominantly historically Black college and university. And then the larger areas here that are displaying in the certain shade of green does represent Black males, which most of our computing programs consist of. So we do have a majority Black male graduates in our degrees. And so what this kind of shows, and this is similar across most HBCUs, is that HBCUs and other, you know, minority serving institutions play a vital role in meeting these demands because of the students that are in our programs. And so here is just a chart that you can also see when you take a look at that site. You can compare, it will actually by default compare your institution with the others across your state, and then it'll show the national data. So this is kind of an, you know, perspective nationally speaking. And so nationally speaking, you know, Black or African American men, we're at about 7% And then Black women, it's fairly low, around 2%. Hispanic men or Latino men, approximately 9.9%, and Hispanic or Latino women, 2.3%. So again, we're not doing very well in regards to women and the intersectionality of, women and race. But nonetheless, you can see nationally, those colors that might have been highly represented at my institution are very lowly, represented nationally. And so this is just a way to kind of understand, set the stage and see what we're attempting and hoping to address through the use of sports analytics. And so here, to engage more diversity at all of our programs, even my own, even at a historically Black college and university, we would need to find ways to continue to engage. Again, for my programs, there are other underrepresented populations that we're still not engaging as well. And so this is called the 3 C's. So these methods would be through curriculum, co-curriculum, and through communities. So these are ways that you can engage in with diversity. This does work across all programs. So even within mathematics, of course, and the natural sciences, like this is a framework that can be used in any discipline. So, and specifically in sports, we all have talked today about how much data is fundamentally changing sports. And so it should be. A lot of the talks I really enjoyed, those that are representative of the conference today in, advancing this as well and advancing the discourse and discussion around how data can and should be changing sports. And so we know that there are so many different ways that you can use data for not only with the athletes, but also with the teams, athletes individually, and then, team impact. And for various applications that are here listed, and, I don't have to go into detail, but I'm kind of preaching to the choir on this, but there are so many different applications and they're increasing. And so, and we've talked about many of them today. So as it relates to BPC, that presents so many different opportunities within sports analytics because this opens the door for the interdepartmental collaborations. We've talked about this a lot, but it's a wonderful opportunity also to engage with sports teams, which on our campus is, a completely different division, of course. And so that's just a wonderful opportunity there. But also it helps to encourage more broad participation because sports is a language that can be understood across the globe, actually. So it's a really great connector. And there's so many real world applications because of the sports data. And we also can have so many partnerships between our industries, professional sports teams, amateur sports teams, college sports teams. It's just a wonderful opportunity for partnership. And one of the things that I really appreciate about sports analytics is that we have both, men and women sports teams. So these strategies can be implemented with a variety of different teams. And there are a lot of approaches that can be used to help multiple, sports. So the main thing in terms of educational perspective, when you're on the academic side, of course, is the sports market. It's growing exponentially, $700 billion US by 2026. It could be, more than that. And this is also starting to be inclusive of, the esports. So we know that there are just so many different opportunities within for BPC and sports analytics. So this is kind of helping to frame the why, why for myself as a professor of computer science and someone interested in being intentional about computer science education, why sports analytics is a wonderful opportunity. And so there, I'll kind of go into a little bit more detail about what I'm doing, on my campus and just how I've used this particular framework and applied sports analytics to help with the BPC on my campus. So this idea of culturally relevant curriculum, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but it's an approach that is research-based, and it's very known that if you're having issues with retention and recruitment in certain disciplines like computer science, one of the things that students will cite that reasons why they don't want to continue with the majors that just don't feel like it's relevant. They don't feel like it's something that they'll ever use. They don't really understand how it can be useful to them or people that they care about. And so in terms of curriculum, unfortunately, traditionally, a lot of STEM topics were taught from like a one perspective, so a Western predominant culture, which is not good in terms of BPC, because the idea with cultural relevancy is to be very intentional of being more broad with your topics. And so whatever might be relevant to your students should be the focus of the curriculum. And one way to do that is to help address the specific needs of like whatever your local community is. So my local community may look different than your local community and vice versa, or the student's local community could be different than the professors. And so to help retain that student, we look to the things and the ideas that a student can bring to the classroom. And so some of the rich elements of this approach is that it can be interdisciplinary, as I mentioned before, where you can start to bring in history, of course, culture, bring in language, bring in geography. And we've talked a lot about history up until this point, because a lot of sports data, of course, is historical. And there's a lot of historical context within sports. So it also is just a wonderful opportunity to kind of bring in history along with the analytics to give the data a more rich story. And therefore, this helps to increase that diversity and the equity in the student experiences. So going into what I decided to do is, as mentioned in the introduction, I created a program called Data Bulls, and data standing for, data analytics, technology, and athletics. And I used a lot of the rationale that I mentioned to you today in regards to, okay, we have this need we definitely need to fill. We also want students to be become interested and, of course, engaged with the curriculum. But there's other challenges in terms of infrastructure as well. So there is a cost to obtaining the tools that may be needed, the computing infrastructure, but also when we're looking at sports analytics, if you want to create or have your own data that hasn't already been cleaned, for example, then there is a cost associated with that. So I did begin to look at different federally funded programs to try to help support that. And so I did receive funding from the Department of Defense as one example to do such a thing. But the idea was to use sports data to help expand students that may not necessarily be in a computer science, right? So even though I am a computer science professor, the goal of this program was actually to be an outreach to non-computing students so that they would first understand sports, and then I could use the program to help them broaden their participation in computing as a help to sports, and not necessarily computing first and sports second. So my approach in this regard was to lead with the students' experiences in the sports industry or with sports in general, and then follow up with computing curriculum. And so one of the first things that we did is purchase the system called Shot Tracker. And the reason why I look to basketball again is because of the season on our campus. Because again, going into culturally relevant, I really wanted to be part of the local community. So our local team, our campus team, again, the Golden Bulls, men and women's basketball team, I wanted to be very inclusive of both teams. And basketball was great because they both, practice and play at the same time in the same season. And they share similar facilities. So I would, this system, which was installed in our, where they practice and play, both the men and women's team is able to use the system. So So the idea was to, purchase this equipment, and it allows not only the players and the coaches to have access to advanced analytics that they didn't necessarily have to compute, but from a research perspective and an academic perspective, it provided me data that our students could use in the classroom that was, again, real world, and it was culturally relevant, where we could explore and learn computing and data science. So of course, again, most of you are familiar with some of the types of questions, but things about efficiency. We talked about so many different things today, but obviously statistics and what statistics might be appropriate in certain situations. We talk about scenarios, we talk about visualizations. There's just so much that we can do with this type of data. And so the one thing that I really love about this system is it really goes into a lot of computing. So so the image on the left kind of shows like the live view of the court when the balls are there. So these balls have sensors in them, and obviously there's cameras / sensors, in the rafters. So each of the goals also have sensors. So it's tracking everything that's happening through the balls, the rafters, the different goals, but also the players. They also have sensors that they can be assigned to as they're practicing on the court. So it helps to visualize what's going on, but also tracks the data live. And you can kind of, if you're not even in the gym, you can watch the practice from this live workout view. But it also gives me a window to discuss the technology behind that, and some of the artificial intelligence that is used to kind of make it happen, some of the computer vision technologies that makes it happen. We get to talk about edge computing, things like that. And then again, with the ball charging rack is something that the students can put their hands on. They can, see it for themselves and just kind of understand, wow, this is how you can pull together an analytics-based system with something that hopefully, if they love the game of basketball, that they find an interest in. And so this next image is also from the app itself, and it's just kind of an idea of what the stats might provide. But again, it's calculated from practice data automatically. So no one is standing there and doing the analytics by hand or anything like that. It happens automatically. And what we're able to do is get the data and download it and analyze it in a lab environment. Of course, there are so many different statistics that can come from this. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but the idea is just to kind of give an example of a project that these students are able to work on. And in terms of the student athletes can also interact with their own data, because this particular system also allows the students to see their own data and work with it and respond to it. So for example, not only can we talk to coaches about decisions that they can make with the data, but we can also help the student athletes also make decisions with data and understand what it means, understand what the heat map can help them, and how the heat map can help them improve their shooting. So these are just tools that really, in my opinion, they do support the athletics program, but it really supports education in a very real world and interactive way. And so how do I connect this to the curriculum? So just as a example, again, from a computing perspective, some students, again, this might be their first experience with programming. So I used a collaboratory environment by Google, which is an interactive Jupyter notebook. So students who are not computing students, they don't have to do any complicated setups or installations, and they're able to use these Python libraries for data analysis and visualization. And I'm able to teach them programming. I call it just-in-time Python, just like, you guys have probably heard of just-in-time math, but it's pretty similar to that. Just-in-time Python, where as we are exploring specific questions, then they're able to learn how to code in a very, applied, interesting way. And so, one example conversation that we could just like this group, we meaning my students can talk on so many different topics, but one particular thing that I might posed to them is, a question about 3-point percentage and what they know about it, what they might know about 3-point percentage in terms of, currently in the NBA, the current 2022-23 season, the question would be, well, who has the highest 3-point percentage? And so, they might guess, oh, it might be this person, it might be that person. And so we would just take a look at the, again, the NBA statistical data and find out. So we find out, okay, well, we might have, the assumption might have been that Stephen Curry had the highest percentage, but he does not. However, he does have the highest, he's a leader in the most 3-point attempts currently. And so what does that mean? Oh, so we have conversation about what does that mean? How do you make sense of that? Does that change a decision-making point for the coach? And so we start to look at minutes. So here in this chart, we kind of like bring in the minutes. Okay, well, does the number of minutes play mean something? How does that kind of change what the number of attempts might be for a player? How does that affect the 3-point percentage for a player? So these are just the types of scenarios, and there's so many different scenarios, but we'll just walk through. But the idea is not just about the analytics, it's also about the strategic thinking that comes along with what you have to do in the end, which is the storytelling piece and the visualization piece. And then, again, to talk about the communities aspect. So I do, I'm very interested in interacting with the different sports conference communities. And as we talk about with BPC, it is important to have that interaction. And so here, this is, we have an area in North Carolina, there's a basketball analytics summit. So students were able to go to that particular summit with me as well and learn and interact with the sports community. In this case, it was specific to sports analytics. On the left, there's a WISE group. They're a little bit more industry focused, but it's still great to interact and kind of hear what's actually happening in industry and particularly among women. And then, of course, our conference today. And then lastly, just to kind of go back to the idea of just being placed in a community and how BPC really can be influenced by that. In the Charlotte community, as I mentioned, you may be familiar with the Panthers and the Hornets, the Charlotte Knights. We have NASCAR, and these all come with their own communities. And therefore, part of this is not for the students to literally be stuck with me in a classroom, but to definitely get them outside of the classroom and interacting with these sports teams, interacting with employees, and particularly who work with data. For obviously some of the application areas that we mentioned with the fan engagement, obviously the decision making on the business side, but also on the player side and on the team side. So these are some of the communities in what I would say our local sports teams where I'm actively engaging students as well. And so that is all. I will like to thank you for your attention and just let me know if you have any questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, feel free to either, unmute and say, hey, great job, or use the little clapping icons, whatever you want to use there. But yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. I will kick off the questions though, and I think part of my introduction for you made some sense out of this, but can you tell me about the funding for the shot tracker system? Because I know that ain't cheap. Is that just coming from the NSF funding that you had?
So I did, I have been very actively seeking funding for these projects. So I did receive funding from the NSF to initially start a research group. And with that, meaning a sports analytics research group. Fearing that money would run out, I also applied for the Department of Defense funding, and that's the one that I mentioned in the presentation. So, but the Department of Defense funding, that was in partnership with our sports management program on campus. And so what we did is not only did that help to continue with the shot tracker system, but it also helped to get more analytics equipment that I didn't really talk about. But like we bought a lot of wearables, and not only for use with the athletic teams with the wearables, but we also were able to integrate that into the health and human performance courses, as well as our research, sports analytics research. But yes, the shot tracker system, but we continue to look for other systems as well that could support other sports, because that was obviously very specific to basketball. And just to mention, I have athletes in my courses, and when I talked about shot tracker, the football players were like, nope, you need to do football. You just need to do football, Dr. Stukes. And I was like, I mean, but where are the women? I was kind of pushing back, because I was like, well, I kind of am interested in making sure women have, some data as well to work with. But they really convinced me, because they started to discuss the CTE components and health, some of the health challenges in football. And so that one student really convinced me, and he was right. I said, you know what, you're right. He was like, yeah, and that's what he meant. He was like, yes, you really should focus on football because of these. He knew firsthand that they were having issues with injuries. And so he convinced me. It was like, you're right, you guys need to have at least access to a wearable or something that can help you track some of these biometric, data points. Yeah.
Does your university have a kinesiology exercise science department? I don't know, have you thought about connecting in that way, or have you done some collaborations in that way?
Good question. And no, we do not. We do not have kinesiology. So I also am part of a team that is developing data science curriculum, and across multiple institutions, that's when you kind of find out, okay, who has an economics program, who doesn't, and so we're the ones who don't have the economics program. We don't have this statistician, in terms of outside of like psychology, right? And we also didn't have kinesiology or sports science, for example. So those partnerships on campus were not there per se, but we then have partnerships off campus with those departments, but not on campus.
Okay. So other questions? I have another comment I'll throw in, but I want to hear from other people too. So Jen Sterling, University of Iowa, by the way, wondering about barriers for inclusion of first-generation students.
Oh, yes. Speaks to the quote unquote hidden curriculum, and meaning that, a lot of these students, in my opinion, it really does take mentoring, like again, targeted mentoring and outreach. So I do not wait for students to come to me and say, hey, Dr. Stukes, do you have a research project that I can work on? Like that's not the path. The path is very targeted outreach. I inform students of multiple pathways into computing, and sports analytics being one of them. And I explain it to them multiple times, and say, give them examples, invite them to lower barriers of entry, lower commitments, maybe a one-time event, maybe a talk, maybe a conference that is local, and then slowly build on that. And so, for example, I had a sport management student who I had not approached him about programming, but it was after he had been interacting with our program for a semester. He said, do you think I could take some programming classes? And I was like, yes, you could, and I smiled because I just couldn't believe it. It was a very casual setting where he felt comfortable to say, do you think I could take a programming class? And I was like, yes, but it's never very formal. So especially with the first generation and or low income college students, I think that there's a mentoring component that needs to happen to kind of bring them to the point where they feel even comfortable enough to take advantages of some of these opportunities.
Great. Other other questions from folks? I'm wondering if one or more, like a group of your students, might present next year at this conference, or a poster or a poster.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah, for sure. And going back to that, it takes a lot of confidence building, a lot of practice, a lot of, yes, like again, going back to the community, like the community and being inclusive and welcoming. And so I'm very careful about that. But once they're ready and it won't cause, a retention problem.
Right.
Yeah, then I usually do encourage them because, you learn so much from conferences like these.
Right. Other questions from folks? Comments? One thought, and this is really for everybody. I'm going to put the link in the chat here in a second. And it's been on my radar for the last few years, and it's just never quite got the oomph. And I'm looking at my calendar, and I think I'm 4 days late on this, which always ends up being the case. So the group CURM, the Council for Undergraduate Research in Math, has a collaborative mini grant process that tries to encourage, and it's not a big money grant, but it's really interesting because it's designed to be collaborative for programs of different types, but with different resources. And so Felesia, you're talking about like, hey, we don't have a kinesiology department, whereas we do, and ours is pretty active. That's where our 2 student poster presenters came from. I think these mini grants are designed to maybe connect institutions that might have complementary resources. I've been sort of like on the market to talk to people about, jointly applying for a grant that might make sense. So I'm throwing this out for everybody to see. I mean, if I know it's described as mini grants for research in mathematics, but actually I've got a math friend of mine who she created a sports analytics working group through one of these mini grants. So I've been kind of aspiring to do the same thing because it'd be really cool. So I'm throwing that out for everybody. But yeah, just a thought. Jen throws out womeninsportstech.org. Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah, any other comments from folks, thoughts, concerns?
Well, I can say to your collaborative grant comment, being in computing, it is really easy to get siloed, especially with, grant programs. And so it is, again, very an intentional process to get out, I mean, I don't know if it's the same for math, not mathematics or not, but to be intentional to build teams. And it's the same with students, to say, oh, it's hard to deny, like, all of your students, quote unquote, and to open up a team to like maybe one of your students and then one of your colleague students, and then letting them all work together. But that is something that has been very rich for us actually recently, is to limit the participation of a team to maybe 1 or 2 majors of the same major.
Yeah.
And then apply for similar opportunities that will allow for that, so that they can bring all their strengths to the table. It's actually been extremely beneficial. We've just recently tried it. I don't know if it's a new thing or not, but it's new for computing to do that. But it has been very impactful. So I think that I'm glad you mentioned that, because it to me, it seems to have yield more educationally anyway, for students to have those more diverse teams with people that have a diverse backgrounds, because that's where the perspectives come in.
Yeah, I just finished. I'll have to see if I can find the link real quick, but I told my intro to data science class, I think just 2 weeks ago, I shared an article with them, basically extolling the virtues of diverse working groups produce better results, and definitely more equitable results to solving various problems too. We were talking a lot about data ethics, and it was a little eye-opening for them. So I'll see if I can find that link here in just a minute. Well, I think we'll let's go ahead and wrap this up here. So Marty sent something. So greatmindsinstem.org/mentornet. Okay, this is good stuff. I might try to tweet a lot of this stuff out, a lot of these links out here pretty soon, because I know I'll get a transcript of the chat, but hopefully y'all can copy and paste some stuff too. But yeah, I'm going to roll into, sorry, let's go ahead and thank Felesia one more time for her time, for her presentation and all that. Yeah, very much appreciate you being here. That was good stuff, especially on a Saturday afternoon, man, stuff. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to roll into, I've got a very, very short little googly slide thing to share with y'all to wrap stuff up. Let me get this started.